Good evening. Welcome to another developer interview here on the Perceptive podcast as part of our Game Wisdom series. My guest tonight is the designer on the upcoming game Battle Train. That by the time this cast goes up, they should either be having a Kickstarter up or it should be just around the corner. But he is here to talk about the game and any other topics that pop up. So please welcome from Terrible Posture Games, Joseph. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing great. It is a lovely hot day here in New Jersey. I know you are up in Boston, so how's the weather for you?
It was actually this week was quite nice. We had a terribly hot week earlier, like towards the end of last week and then the weekend, but now it's calmed down a little bit. Actually, I haven't been outside yet today, so I couldn't tell you. It's that type of year where you don't know if you're going to get storms or 90 degrees plus 90% humidity, or Boston at this time of year begins to start fluctuating wildly from week to week.
Mm-hmm. But it is great to have you on. We got certainly a lot of things to discuss. So, let's begin with, I guess, a little bit about yourself. Since this is your first time on the cast, can you talk a little bit about kind of like who your what your background is when it comes to game dev?
Sure. So my name is Joe Mirabello, and I'm the founder and creative director at Terrible Posture Games. I started the studio about 10 years ago, almost on accident. I used to work in AAA games on action RPGs and MMOs, and I was one of the few indies back then. I kind of went indie, leaving AAA behind, and made a solo project called Tower of Guns. And this was, I thought it was going to be just a sabbatical, take a break, make something for myself for a little while, and then go back to working for other companies. And it accidentally became a second career. I went from making this solo project. It was a FPS roguelite combo, and it was made pretty much just by me, although other people helped me port it and test it later on as it got further in development. But I went from that to making a follow-up called Mother Gunship with another studio, then to starting a studio. I made a playable sitcom with collaboration with Epic Games called 3 out of 10. Which was a really ridiculously fun project. We made a VR version of Mother Gunship called Mother Gunship Forge. That was very well reviewed. We've worked on some work-for-hire stuff, including a Walking Dead game and in a Invincible game, a game set Invincible World, which was a lot of fun. And now we're working on this thing called Battle Train. This is we're calling it a deck and track builder. It is essentially a deck builder where you're also laying down these tracks and building a pathway to an opponent's base and launching explosive locomotives. It's basically an exploding locomotive dueling game. It's a lot of fun. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's been this labor of love for the studio for quite a few years now, in between all these other things that we've done to keep the studio up and running.
Nice, and my ears perked up when you mentioned Tower of Guns and Mother Gunship, because I did play both. I did enjoy Mother Gunship from the time I spent with it. And yeah, we could... we do not have the time today to discuss Mother Gunship, but I would love to chat with you about kind of like building that game and kind of like the modular gun system in the future.
But that was a lot of fun to make, and we learned a lot of things from it that we then took and I don't know if you're a VR player, but in Forge, which was the VR follow-up to it, we really nailed that modular gun system even better. It kind of makes sense. You can think about putting together the gun parts really easily in VR, where you can just slap them wherever you like, rather than having to navigate this wacky menu. But that said, we learned a lot about what makes that kind of kit bashing gameplay fun through both of those games, and we've applied them directly into Battle Train, where you're constantly changing your train around, you're building out this awesome deck of cool abilities to lay down on the battlefield, and you're fighting through essentially the world's most popular game show to become the what we call the supreme president conductor of the game. And it's a lot of wacky fun. There's a lot of cool explosions and effects and abilities that the different characters can do. And we definitely have in our DNA as a studio this sense of levity and surprise and delight that from Mother Gunship you probably experienced it. And we've kind of kept it through all of our games.
So I guess my first question for you, Joe, is what kind of like attracted you to go from making like very high speed, very action heavy Mother Gunship and Tower Guns to more of a turn-based, more like tactical style with Battle Train?
We're not necessarily done making FPS stuff, just so you know. FPS games are near and dear to my heart, and I love that genre. You're listeners can't see, but I have a wall off to the side that's filled with retro FPS games, the big boxes I collect. So, for anyone who's a fan of those older games, we're not done with making things like that. But that said, the game for Battle Train came about almost by accident originally when we were making 3 out of 10, that playable sitcom I mentioned earlier. There were some mini game aspects and some things we learned and some technology we built that we really felt like we could explore further. And so while we were between a couple of projects, we spent a few months developing that. And then we went to something else, a work for hire project, and then came back to it. And we kept kind of coming back to it and building it bigger and bigger and bigger until suddenly we had a game on our hands. And that game was Battle Train. And we realized it was really fun. We've had people who were playing our little single map early preview. We thought people would play it for 10 or 15 minutes. We've had people put 70 hours into it. So we're like, okay, there's something here. This game is ridiculous. Let's keep exploring it. And the more we put into it, the more we realized that we hadn't experienced anything quite like it, but it was very intuitive and very fun. And people, once they, kind of got what it was doing, they got the silliness of it. It was super intuitive. It's basically very much a fresh but familiar game that people feel like they know how to play even before they've ever started, just from looking at it. And as a designer, I always try and chase down these designs that I feel like should have been made somewhere before, but haven't. Something I feel like is really fresh, but also familiar enough that nobody's intimidated by it.
And with kind of like the modular aspects of Battle Train, can you go a little bit more detail about, I guess, like kind of like what level of customization does the game kind of offer in terms of its gameplay?
So first off, there's a couple of different things. One, you have this battlefield in front of you where you're trying to navigate your route to your enemy base, and that is like train track style. It's almost like dueling pipe dream. You're laying down these tracks, manipulating the board, constantly figuring out ways to either thwart your opponent or give yourself advantages. And at the same time, you are building up this deck. That deck is your abilities. The conceit of the deck building aspect is really a good shorthand for playing with themes like randomization, themes like shuffling different abilities in, things like rarity. It really becomes a very convenient shorthand that players understand to convey a lot of different materials, a lot of different concepts revolving around chance or likelihood of something to drop. So these abilities of yours, you can basically stack how often you get them. You can manipulate your deck to affect how the gameplay is going to roll out and what build you're going to be doing and how your attacks are going to play out. And so there's that aspect from a mechanical standpoint. And at the same time, you have this train that you're building based off of parts you find along the way that can get pretty ridiculous. We start with things that are pretty common, the different kinds of train pieces that you see in the trailer. But I have a lot of hopes to get really silly with those things, train parts that you would not expect to see. I really want to make a train that looks like a castle, for example, and you could put together parts of a castle onto your train. I think that kind of stuff is a lot of fun. There's a train that we have that is built out of pieces that look like a pirate ship. And I really find that this is where you start to get surprise and delight in terms of what you can do, and also seeing things you've never seen, combinations you've never seen. At the end of each run, you'll have your train right there, and you can show off what you've got, what you've built. And it's not just train parts. There's also, little adornments and hats. We haven't talked too much about hats, but your train can have hats. This gives you an example of how ridiculous it gets. We really like the idea of this being the kind of thing where you've built it in pieces over the course of your run, but it is a run-based game, so it's not like you're going to build the single best train and then always use that. Instead, you're going to be taking advantage of the situations that come your way. And when you have this really serendipitous combination of events, it creates a ludicrous run that you really want to capture. And in your train at the end of that run, maybe something really special that players are going to really get a kick out of sharing, we feel like. And it's customized, but also a result of a lot of randomization elements that get thrown your way, and in a lot of good lucky chances that the player will be able to take advantage of as it comes along. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of your character in Isaac. Isaac is a very interesting game that was very inspirational, even to Tower Guns and Mother Gunship. And I keep going back to a lot of the lessons in that game.
And I am certainly no stranger to Binding of Isaac, especially with all the roguelikes that I have played.
Yeah, Isaac. It's not for everybody from a visual or tone standpoint, but I think that every designer should play it. And nowadays, a lot of things have come that have been inspired by it, but in context, there was a lot that it did that was smart, and I have a lot of respect for Ed McMillan as a designer.
With something like Battle Train, in terms of, I guess, like the variants that can come into like the runs itself. You mentioned, of course, the tracks. You mentioned like the powers. So with kind of like the play of the game, I was looking at the screenshots, and for people watching, I haven't had a chance to play the demo as of this recording, but I'm planning on doing it after we're done with it. So, do the player and the opponent do they both use like the same tracks, or does like the player tracks can only allow the player's train, and your opponent's tracks can only allow the opponent's train?
A little bit of all of the above. It's a little bit hard to describe. Mechanically, there's a good reason behind this, and it's pretty intuitive. But there is your deck of cards that you have, and then there is a deck of cards that the enemy has, and that enemy card, that the enemy deck can change per enemy. So, for example, if you're fighting this wacky little bomb character, he could have a lot of bomb cards, and it's just like, okay, you're gonna have to fight through a lot of explosions to get to their base. Or if you're fighting the pirate, he's got this cool anchor ability that shifts the whole board that we have in the trailer, and it's a lot of fun to look at. And those are really cool things that help make those enemies feel fresh and unique. But there's also this thing called the board deck, and that changes the entire gameplay of the actual fight. So the board deck is a shared deck that both players have access to. Mechanically, it's there to keep you from getting into problems because it'll always have something that you can use to get unstuck. For example, you're not going to find yourself, pinned into a corner if you have a deck of cards that is nothing but explosions. So you always have the ability to build towards your enemy because of the board deck. However, the kind of board deck that there is may vary depending on the board. So you may find yourself in a battlefield that is long and skinny, and the kind of cards that the board deck is going to offer up are going to be different than, say, this gigantic sprawling wasteland full of lots of bigger track cards. So the end result is that there's a lot of elements to keep the gameplay fresh, and as you play the game more and more, you'll start to realize that different kind of combinations of enemy, board deck, and cards can have different results. And so certain tactics may work really well for some combination, and certain other tactics may work not as well. So as you build your own train and deck up, you're going to find yourself wanting to accommodate for weaknesses in your strategy. Or you're going to find yourself wanting to deal with certain characters in a certain way. Like some characters you may want to rush as fast as you can because they have cards that are going to screw you up later because you're not strong against certain kinds of cards.
Okay. And with kind of like the overall play, is there a meta progression? Like, do you unlock like new cards and new parts like permanently, or are all the upgrades done on a run by run kind of feel?
There is some permanent upgrades in a very Binding of Isaac style, where as you're playing through the game, you unlock a larger pool of parts, and this is a really elegant way to introduce more complex parts down the road. You start with parts that are fairly easy to use, and then you can get more and more sophisticated with the kinds of parts that you reveal to the player without ever needing to tutorialize them. That's very similar to what Binding of Isaac does. I'd like to get more meta progression elements into the game that are mechanically driven and more unlock based. However, that part we're still working through. There is a full story, but we haven't really talked about that yet, and we're really excited about the story elements because that is another element of meta progression. But we've been pretty coy about that so far.
And I'm looking at the store page. So obviously this is going to be a single player game. Are there any plans that have like multiplayer or player versus player content for something like this?
We would love to do multiplayer. Like this game, when you look at it, it looks like a multiplayer game. It looks like it'd be fun as a multiplayer game. It looks like it'd be fun to blow up your friends or even fight with your friends. It seems like it's begging for that kind of feature. Given how tiny we are, we're building this game in collaboration with Nerd Ninjas, and we've got a pretty aggressive scope and aggressive timelines. We're focused on single player at the moment. However, we would love to be able to build multiplayer, and so we're looking at different ways to kind of find extra time, extra funding to make that happen. And that's we talked about the Kickstarter earlier. That'd be one of the things that the Kickstarter could help with potentially is finding ways to unlock extra things that we know would just make the game that much better. And that's one of them.
Okay. And I guess with looking at like screenshots as you've been talking, Joe, with kind of like the general play, I guess how do you like set up like a win in this, like in terms of building out like, your path. Like I'm looking, one of the things I saw in like your trailers, you had like the kind of like giant like hook that just like pulls like the entire board closer. Like
That's the pirate move. Yeah, you can get that too. You can do that to them, and it messes everything up because it screws up all of the connection points. However, tactically, it can be very advantageous too, because you are pulling the board closer together, and it does create a higher stress situation if the board is smaller. But sorry, I interrupted you. What was the question you were going for there?
I guess like in terms of like going for win, like what's kind of like the how do you like facilitate a win like for during a battle in battle train?
Oh, during a battle? Well, you win by destroying the enemy outposts, and you have to destroy all of them. There are outposts and stations. The trains come from the station. You never need to worry about them. The outposts are placed in different parts around the battlefield. It depends on the battlefield. The players and the enemy's health are divided up between those stations, and so you'll start chipping away at essentially their health. There are ways to repair health, but you are literally trying to destroy those outposts. And the tactics that you take can be different depending on the kind of cards and the kind of enemies that you are facing. That pirate that I mentioned before, he pulls the board in and makes the board smaller with his anchor move. You can get that too, and you can pull the board smaller, but there's some enemies that like to build tons and tons and tons of tracks and just fill the entire board with tracks everywhere. And those kinds of enemies can result in, basically the entire board being filled with a lot less places to go, and the tactic then is trying to bomb and take over their tracks. You can actually share tracks with the enemy, which creates this interesting dynamic where you're not necessarily tug of warring, but you're letting them do the work and finding the right time to take over their tracks. And you kind of have this opportunity to I guess take advantage of all of the work that your enemy has built, and they can do the same thing to you as well. So you're kind of looking for ways to protect that as well, protect your own bases. So how you win, how you destroy those outposts, to get to the core of your question, will entirely depend on the build and the enemy that you're facing. And sometimes it makes sense to try and take an enemy down as fast as possible. Sometimes you may want an enemy to survive a little bit longer, and it'll just depend on the circumstances. And that's one of the things that has kept this game feeling fresh, is that everything we add to the game, every new enemy, every new ability, starts to expand those possibilities dramatically. We're at the point now where we're really starting to dive into synergies and getting different kinds of builds that feel really sophisticated, because that's where you'll get a lot of replayability. If people start realizing they have an opportunity in front of them, but they have to look for second or third cards to really make it shine. That's you kind of start to unlock that secret sauce that makes people go from playing the game for 5 to 10 hours to hundreds of hours, because they're always looking for fun synergies.
Mm-hmm. And with kind of like the map design itself, you mentioned that maps will have their own kind of deck or their own set of cards that both players can have access to. Are the maps, I guess, like fixed each time you play, or will things be like randomly shuffled in some respect, like on the same map if you replay it?
Within the same map, first off, whether or not you get that map will be random, because there are a lot of different boards. We've got a pretty aggressive target of making enough maps that you'll never see the same map twice within a single run, if not more. But right now there aren't very many elements that are randomized in it. However, that doesn't mean that we haven't talked about that and think about whether or not it makes sense to start to randomize things like the placement of some of the outposts within a certain range, or placement of extra bonuses. There's lots of ways that we're adding more and more sophistication to the game, and that's just one of 10 different things we've been talking about to expand the variety. That's the word I was looking for. The map randomization, though, is a little bit of a tricky one, because especially if a map is generally combined with an enemy, sometimes that map is designed in an intentional way to kind of encourage the player to do certain kinds of things or not do certain kinds of things. We like to keep things pretty open-ended, so we have a lot of open-ended maps, but some of them are maps that have like, okay, here's a map that's divided into 2 lanes. One is super wide and one is really narrow, but you've got to like bomb your way through it the whole time. And something like that, randomization doesn't make as much sense, because there is a design question to be answered by the player in that map. So it entirely depends on the map and whether or not we gain a lot from that randomization. Other elements are no-brainers, like having random gold that's in 3 different random spots on the board that you could pick up. There may not be a reason to make that a specific spot always in every version of that board that you see. So It again comes down to a case by case question, and I'm sure you've seen similar in other games that
Mhm.
randomization is not always a good thing. Sometimes you can destroy the conversation that the player is having with the designer if things get too random.
Mm-hmm. And you need to have just like that right amount of variance with like the varieties of your cards to make each run feel different. If everything revolves around just one really good card, then everyone's gonna go for that one really good card, that one really good build, and all your
Yep.
other cool stuff just gets kind of like thrown out the window.
Now I have a theory about that. That exact thing is it's the theory of fun OP. I don't know what the proper term for it is, but the idea that an OP build is totally okay so long as it's rare, hard to get, and doesn't overstay its welcome. So basically, you could have this perfect, awesome card that is amazing, but if you only ever get it twice in the 100 hours you play the game, well, that's pretty good. Then the player is able to expect and like kind of see it, especially if it doesn't happen in the you know, first 10, 20 hours of them playing the game. They get to know the mechanics, they get to know the actual feel of the game, and then when they get that card, they're like, whoa, hold on here. This changes everything. Now we're going to go wreck some stuff. And they have fun. As long as it doesn't overstay its welcome, it can be really enjoyable. And you'll see like other kinds of games will do this all the time. They'll give you usually somewhere around the end of the second act, they'll give you, if you're playing an FPS game, they'll give you the mech for like 10 minutes and they'll let you just destroy everything. And as long as it's only 10 minutes, it's fun. One of my favorite go-to examples of this is this is not related to strategy games at all, but the Escape from Butcher Bay Chronicles of Riddick game, which is better than any of the Chronicles of Riddick movies. You were playing as a prisoner escaping a prison, and you get into an office complex, and then at some point, when you're in this office, the like prison offices, you get a mech. Literally, you're in the hallways of this office with this gigantic mech, and you're just destroying everything, and nobody can hurt you. And it's for about 10 minutes, and then you get to a wall you can't get past, and you're moving on. But it was an awesome diversion, and as long as an OP factor doesn't overstay its welcome, it's fun to play around with the edges of your mechanics a little bit and let the player see just how wild it can get if they were to cheat all the time. You just don't want to hang around too long, or then the game becomes boring because people do need a little bit of a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And it again, like go back to the Biomizing example. Like the beauty when I interviewed Ed Mirabello was that he did not care about perfect balance. He didn't want like every run to feel the exact same way. He wants those runs to be as spiky as possible. And I think part of what makes that work so well is that it makes the game more memorable. That
it does.
Yeah, if you have one run where you get the super awesome death laser that just kills everything, that's great. If you get that same item every single time, it gets boring. But if every run you get just like a pea shooter and it feels slow and boring, people also don't like that. And it is that kind of like line you have to walk with any kind of like roguelike or roguelike design in terms of just how much you want to like let the player be able to get crazy and how much you need to rein that in. Because I've played roguelikes and roguelikes have kind of fallen on both ends of that spectrum where every run just feels incredibly easy or every run feels incredibly hard, and it doesn't feel, I think, like it doesn't feel like a good experience. Like it feels like too much of it is tied to that RNG.
Yeah, it takes a lot of like the spikiness there is something that can be a lot of fun. If you get too balanced though, then it's essentially a line between memorability or homogeneous, whatever the word is. And you can see the more you balance for multiplayer, the more you have to go down that homogeneous route, and you end up with things that aren't overpowered in multiplayer games. You end up with things that aren't memorable in a multiplayer game. It's very hard to balance for short-lived overpoweredness in a multiplayer version of a game. You can, but generally people they don't consider those games to be competitive. This is one of the reasons I think that superhero fighting games are really tough, because if you have somebody who really wants to play as the Punisher and somebody who really wants to play as, I don't know, like the Hulk, Punisher is going to have a really hard time winning against the Hulk, But they have to balance them out in those games, and so they have to either, neuter one of the superheroes or make another character overpowered in a weird way, and it all just kind of balances out and feels lukewarm. You can solve it in a lot of different ways. You can see some of the creative solutions, to bring up, superhero fighting games in particular. You can see like summon powers that they'll have, that every character can have a summon for a buddy, and those will be the super powerful character. You see solutions to that problem, but competitive and multiplayer hamstrings a lot of the excitement and fun, especially of roguelites at least. All genres to some extent, but with roguelites in particular. So I do love the idea of playing with friends, but I think that the more collaborative it is and less competitive it is, the more you can get away with. So I do like the idea of a competitive multiplayer aspect as well, but Battle Train, I don't think will, even if we get multiplayer funding and we're able to build something to the largest extent of our dreams, I don't think this is ever going to be the thing that has like ranked competitive play. It's going to be the kind of thing that you get together and you blow things up with your friends, and oh, that one friend got an amazing, awesome RNG, card, and everybody is saying like, well, that there goes the game, but that's okay because it was fun and rare for us all to see, and it was wild anyway, and that was fun. And that's the goal, still keep things wild and over the top, and everybody should hopefully be able to appreciate the rarity of it.
Yeah, and there's another greater topic here about kind of like competitive versus cooperative, and kind of like AI or AI opponent versus a human opponent when it comes to these kinds of games. I could, that's another hour or two we can certainly get into. I just finished several posts on the very topic on like esports and kind of like that kind of like competitive design, how it impacts multiplayer and balance. And
they're some of the best designers in the world working on esports titles, and they're also some of the least, I think, most hamstrung, I guess.
Yeah.
They're the least able to exercise their design muscles because they have to be so constrained with what they can do.
It kind of like I think is very much like the antithesis of what we were talking about with like a roguelike and roguelike design. Like if you look at games like Binding of Isaac, Dead Cells, Monster Train, of course Battle Train coming up, you can get incredibly spiky, very crazy abilities. Like there are runs in a game like Dead Cells where you can just stomp everything. Like it's just I hit button, everything melts on screen. That works really great when you're fighting against a computer opponent. If you're playing against like a friend or some random person online, I hit button, your entire build dies. That person's probably going to throw their computer out the window.
Unless you have some really clever ways to rubber band the overpoweredness, and ways that they could have predicted. So like if they know the player has gotten something very powerful, and you give them an increased chance, like let's take Battle Train. This is a completely hypothetical example. Let's say there's a destroy the entire map card. You'd have to find some way to give the competitor a card that allows them to steal a card. So then it can be traded back and forth a bunch, like kind of like ways to mitigate overpoweredness a little bit in ways that keep it unique. Even if they're not able to take advantage of it, you have to, if you're talking about getting competitive, you have to find ways to trade the OP-ness. I don't know if that's worth it though, because some of it, in a game like Battle Train, the OP-ness is maybe part of the fun. So I wouldn't want to sacrifice that. If we get the budget to do a multiplayer version, then that's a fun problem that I would love to solve and love to dive into more. But one of the most successful ways I've seen to combat this in the roguelite subgenres has been seeded play, where both people have the same run and they're competing not for direct competition against each other, but competition for a score and a leaderboard rank on hey, we both have the same exact run, we both have the same chance to get the same OP-ness, who takes advantage of it better? And then you have a competitive but OP experience for everybody. And I love that sort of stuff. Spelunky was amazing. Their seeded run stuff was great.
And I'm happy you brought up the example, like the card that just destroys the whole board, because in my book I wrote on deck builders and CCG design, I brought up an example very much of that, this is a card that just, you play this card, the opponent just dies instantly. It's probably not the most balanced card, and I was like kind of working through in the book, how can we make this a little bit more,
that's a great exercise.
palatable for a game like that. And it's that kind of challenge when it comes to these games, especially when it comes to like multiplayer and competitive aspects, is that you want like that spikiness. Like again, like the spikiness of any kind of deck builder, that kind of customization, that's like at the hallmark of why people play these games. But again, when you put this in like a competitive or an esports field, a lot of people, or a lot of like the players, they don't want that kind of randomness or unpredictability. Like imagine a game like a Monster Train or a Binding of Isaac or a Battle Train like an Evo, where in grand finals this guy got the lucky draw and got the super triple shotgun card, and now he just wins finals. People would probably flip.
you do have that effect. If you look at like poker, people
Mhm.
will draw amazing hands,
Yep.
but there's this element of the bluffing and the calling and the like. What do they have? And so then, even when you have an like an OP hand, is it OP enough? Is it OP enough to really do it? And
Yep.
what's the maximum amount of damage I can do with this hand to the other player? You're not going to be able to knock them out unless they think they're overpowered too, and you both end up like against each other with what you think is overpowered. Like poker is a really good example of self-balancing overpoweredness in a weird way.
Mhm.
So it takes several hands of really good hit. Like basically someone who's terrible at poker is never going to be able to win, even if they got the OP hand a bunch,
Mhm. Yep.
compared to somebody who's really, really good. And I'm terrible at poker, but at least I can recognize that.
Yeah, man,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's one we don't have the time to today because we could spend hours on this about kind of like the player's skill versus what the game gives them. Because I've used this example many times when I talk about like competitive play. Can the worst player with the best gear beat a player the best player, but who has the worst gear? Like it's that kind of dichotomy there.
That is actually something I did in Tower of Guns. I
Mhm.
made sure that there was a mode. Now, Tower of Guns had a lot of problems. I was learning as a designer. First off, it was my first project as a designer and as a solo developer. But I made sure that every room, every kind of enemy combination, every boss could be beaten with the lowest starting gear. Even if it was very hard for me, even if it took me many tries, and even if it took me 10 minutes of firing, straight at one enemy, could they do it? And so, could the best player beat the game without any power ups at all? And they could. Now, I was doing it in isolation, almost save scumming style. So it's like, in theory, yes, someone could string together all the save scums and beat the game without any upgrades. But I was doing it like this room at a time, this boss at a time, in like these digestible chunks. So that led me feeling confident that it led to me feeling a confidence that the best player could beat the game with the worst gear if they were getting enough solid, good performing runs in a row at not necessarily good gear, but good performance. Then they could beat the game still, but it would be very hard. And I felt like that was a very smart thing that I had done. Even as a novice designer, the inverse, can a player who's terrible beat the game with the best gear? And unfortunately, with Tower Guns, there's so much jumping and so much moving that I don't think that's true. Players who are terrible at it were just terrible. There was a lot more mobility in that game, and Mother Gunship was the same way. There's a lot of mobility in that game that would compromise a young player or a novice player's ability to get super far, even with the most overpowered of gears. So I'm still learning a lot as a designer about that, and Battle Train is much. It has a long way to go, even in its own road there, but I can say that I've definitely taken a lot of lessons from our prior roguelites.
It is that kind of like challenge because again, like people who play like in kind of roguelike, they will try like low build challenges. They'll try can I beat this game using just a starting weapon, soul level 1 runs and any kind of souls like. And you always have to balance that with the people who want to see that kind of cool stuff. They don't want to do a level 1 run. They want
Very few people want to be masochists.
yeah. Again, like people watching know how many games I play like the hardest difficulty, but they want that kind of craziness. They like to go with something like with Mother Gunship. They want to see like the penta shotgun, Gatling gun. They want the entire bottom of the screen to just be gun, and they
Yep.
hit the button and the sound blows, they blow their headphones with all the...
Maybe I could have used some clamping, but yes, you're right. Yep, and that was when people enjoyed the game the most, is when you let them do that. That game's fatal flaw, I feel like, was not letting you use the gun that you had been building up over a long period of time for longer, because you had spent time really getting something special there, and then it was a mission-based thing, closer to Darkest Dungeon and less like Tower of Guns. And I have regrets about that. It was what we built at the time, and it was a solid. The reasons behind it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But then for Forge, we took a different approach when we made Mother Gunship Forge, the VR version, and we went with you're building this gun over a period of several missions in a row, and the result was a stronger game. I feel like there's a lot less players on the VR side, but that is the best design game that we've made, and it was learning directly from what did and didn't work on the original Mother Gunship. So if we were to ever make a sequel for Mother Gunship, well, now we know at least what people are really enjoying about the game a lot more.
Yeah, that's always like that trick when it comes to any kind of like run-based game. Was there are people who will play a roguelike or roguelike they'll do one run, they'll win and go, okay, I beat the game. I don't have to play this game anymore. That one run was my entire experience. And then you'll have people who they'll play, they'll do hundreds of runs. They will, if you have like progressive difficulty or ascension mode, they will go all the way up. They will try and use every single card and weapon in your game. And they won't feel satisfied until they have seen everything.
And you got to make sure you give those people that collection menu so they can see, like, oh, I'm at 80%. All right, I got to go beat the game with this card now in order to get my 81.
Mm-hmm.
It's the platinum players. I don't know what else to call them. The platinum players.
Yeah, and it is tricky, I think, from like kind of like a design presentation point of view, because you'll have that person who they want to keep that deck or that gun or whatever their build is, and they want to use it for every single run because, well, they liked it. They, it felt good to them. And then when you take the rug out from under them, it feels like a betrayal. And then you have people who have played roguelikes who are just like, as soon as everyone's over, take all this, throw in the trash. I'm ready, give me something new, and let's do it again.
And Mother Gunship tried to combat that a little bit by saying, like, you have all your parts there. There's reasons you could dissect Mother Gunship's design quite a bit, and there's reasons behind all the designs that we made in that game that were sound, solid, mechanical reasons. Just some of them were at odds with what was most unique and what we encouraged, what we liked the most, and what people liked the most about the game. So even if a design makes sense on paper, sometimes you just have to kind of take a step back and look at the heart of a game, which you may not even know until you're able to look at it objectively. And the wackiness of the construction in Mother Gunship was pretty core to that heart. So, lessons that you are able to see much clearer 3 or 4 years out after the fact. With Battle Train, we've got some of these lessons. And so, there's things that we know we want to build up, but we want to convey to the player that, like, no, each time you play this game, you're a contestant on the show. So here's the new stuff. And here's the stuff that's saved. And we're trying to build that into the core framework of the lore to kind of make that a little bit easier for players who are both fans of roguelites and not necessarily as familiar with roguelites.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of our time, I know we are about like 20 minutes out from what we've budgeted. So, anything else regarding the design of Battle Train before we move on to a little bit more about like the Kickstarter and the plans for it?
Well, I mean, we're excited to get people playing it. We would love if people could wishlist the game on Steam. These days, I'm sure you probably had other people talking about how important wishlists are these days. Mm-hmm. So a Steam wishlist, if you're a fan of any indie game, not just of Battle Train, if you're a fan of any indie game, any small developer, go wishlist and follow their games on Steam, because that is the currency that matters according to the Steam algorithm. And fortunately, if you want an indie to stay in business, you got to help them have the best chance for when their game does actually come out, so that they can have the game actually be shown to people. Steam is a wonderful marketplace, but it is a very crowded marketplace. And so, a wish list and a follow are free. And so that's the biggest thing I would like to lay in as an action item, is go wish list games. Go wish list all the games that you want, that you're even remotely interested in, and support the developers.
So, for the last part of our conversation, because we are kind of budgeting our time here, I want to talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter, which this cash should be going up right around either just before or just after the Kickstarter is launched. So, for you, Joseph, in terms of the Kickstarter for Battle Train, one thing I always like to ask developers about it is, with I guess going to Kickstarter, was this part of the original plan when you're developing Battle Train, or is this more of a way of kind of like, I guess, like getting the game over the finish line?
Actually, it was not part of the original plan. I've always wanted to do a Kickstarter. It seemed like it would be a fun way to kind of engage with the community, and raising some funds is important too. But I really like that community building aspect behind it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we partnered with another studio. We partnered with Nerd Ninjas to build the game. And they've done a lot of Kickstarter work, and they had a similar kind of attitude of like, this is a great way to build a community and help foster a group of people to help you make this game better. And so they were strongly encouraging it, and that's one of the primary reasons we want to run the Kickstarter. Yes, there's additional funds to push us beyond what we could have done, but I want to be clear that with the help of Nerd Ninjas, we are able to get the single player version of the game out the door and feeling strong and good. I feel confident this will be a solid game. this Kickstarter is about getting us to push ourselves further. It's about getting us to get some features in that we know we're going to have cut, stretching ourselves to get things like, multiplayer would be lovely. That's a pretty big stretch goal, not a small one at all. However, it is something that, we've spec'd out. We know how long it would take to make, and we know the kinds of costs associated with it. We would love to be able to do. And then largely is like, hey, we want to get a bunch of people to play this game, take a look at it, and see what they think, and we want to build it while hearing from them, because I don't believe that the best games are made in a black box. I think the best games are made when exposed to a bit of sunlight, via other players, via a public, via some group of external people who can validate what you're working on. And I feel like that's one of the best ways to temper your design, to find things you're not seeing, to get an objective view, to foster engagement back and forth. There's tons and tons of benefits. I've done early access before, and it has a similar kind of feel to it. And Kickstarter is another similar tool that I feel like is just a great way to kind of start conversations going, and find a group of people that are really as excited about the game as you are, and who want to see you building it and pushing it, and want to see you push it even further. So there's lots of reasons to go with a Kickstarter. That said, this is our first time that we will be doing a Kickstarter, so it is new to us, and we are definitely trying to find the right timing. There's a lot of events that are coming up in the later summer and the fall. So trying to find the timing that doesn't spread us too thin. We are a super small team, so that has been a logistically tricky thing to do. Right now we're focused on. I mentioned to you at the beginning, at the top of this, that we're going to be at the Seattle Indies Expo, and then we'll be looking at the Kickstarter right following that in the beginning of the fall. So hopefully, when this comes out, things will kind of lined up pretty close, so that if not immediately, then very soon after, we will have the Kickstarter up and running. And similar to Steam, Kickstarter does have a way that you can follow the developers, and that is actually really helpful, because then it gets a good sense of how the health of that Kickstarter campaign is, and how that first day will go. It sounds weird, but the very first day, the more we learn about Kickstarter, the more we're like, it's similar to Steam, but slightly different. That first day is super important to get visibility on Kickstarter. Almost like a mini Steam launch, even though the game is going to be still having a lot of development to go behind it. We know that first day on Kickstarter is going to be really important. We are targeting also giving players access to the game at that point. So, there will be a tier where you can unlock immediate ability to play the game and see what we're up to. Or if you just want to, pick up the game and then wait until it comes out for real, that'll be an option for you as well. But for those that are interested in contributing to the conversation of how the game is built and finished out, we'd love to have you. So, day one, please.
Yep. And with Kickstarter, the first day, and especially the last week or the last couple of days are some of the biggest points, because I've seen Kickstarter projects that they are kind of mid to maybe 75% of the way through, and then they have that last 48, 72 hour rush to sometimes get them over the finish line.
Yeah, and that's I'm learning more and more about that stuff too as well. It's really wacky the way the curves work, and how you could map the curve based off the first day's results and kind of see whether or not you think you're going to make it. But there's an expected dip in the middle. Some campaigns I think probably take off and have a different sort of curve. It's very similar to all the things I've had to learn about Steam and other platforms. Every platform has their own kind of shape to the curves and how the population tends to go for new games or things that have been out for a while. With Battle Train, it's going to be interesting to see what people think about it, because it's it's a very, very unique game. It's wildly fun, but it is wildly unique. So it's not like we can look and be like, well, how did the last explosive locomotion dueling game do on Kickstarter? Because we should look for that as a comparison. There's nothing like that. You can look at strategy games, you can look at roguelike games, you can look at games that have a similar art style, but this is a unique game that is a labor of love, and I think that hopefully other people see that and get excited about it. I think that certainly the people who see the trailer are like, wow, this looks like a really unique and wacky, fun game. So now the question is, how do I convince them that, yes, it is as fun as it looks like? Please back us on Kickstarter.
Yep. And it is, when it comes to Kickstarter these days, you really need to put, a strong foot forward in terms of getting people, interested in your game. I've seen Kickstarters where the demo just does not do anything. Like it's just like a very basic demo. It's kind of like an early like alpha demo that you put on Steam, and if you try to put that on Kickstarter, a lot of people just aren't going to give that the time of day. Like there's definitely a discussion to be had about how much Kickstarter has changed over the past 10 years in terms of like kind of like what projects people are going to jump at. So I think there's still some people who feel like it's still like very much like the, Double Fine, like Broken Age, where it's a new idea, let's just throw tons and tons of money at it. And a lot of consumers these days are now very more conscious over, okay, what is this going to actually do, and do I want to support it?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's also weird the way that it's different between video games and tabletop. It seems like the tabletop community is really adopted Kickstarter. So it seems like that's a lot of the ways that tabletop stuff gets funded, and maybe even gains profit these days. But if you look at them, they all have the game basically done before the Kickstarter is even started. So I don't quite think Kickstarter is a Kickstarter for tabletop. It feels like it is a sales platform for Kickstarter, or like basically a pre-order platform or something. For games, the costs are a little different. I don't know how much it costs to make a tabletop game, but I know it is significantly less than most video games, and yet video games tend to not have nearly as much of a one of a funding goal, and then two, just funding in general. I think that Kickstarter fans have been burned a lot on video games, and so they have a, I think, understandable hesitancy and want to really make sure that a game is real before they back it, as opposed to a tabletop one where they can see it's real because it's right there. They can see the photos of it, or they can see the sculpts of it, or a lot of example of it, and they can. I think, I think there's been maybe just less times chances to be burned by tabletop. I don't know. I could make more conjectures, but I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to tabletop Kickstarter. I just know that we're making the best game we can, and we feel like it'll be something that people like, and our demo we feel like is pretty strong. I'd be curious to know, once you get a chance to try the demo, give it a go. You can try it on Steam now and see what you think. We feel it's pretty fun. It's a pretty tight, contained experience, but we're gonna continue to refine it. There's events coming out throughout the fall that will make us prove even further, both the demo and the current core build itself. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what you think.
Yeah. And yeah, as I said just before we start, I'm going to try and get some play of the demo on one of my indie showcase nights or indie showcase streams, so we'll have plenty of B-roll to be going while people have been listening to us for the last almost an hour at the time of the last time check here. I guess. Awesome. Oh, one thing that I want to ask you about, specifically with the Kickstarter, in terms of, I guess, like rewards or incentives, this is something that every game can do wildly different things. I've seen games have, here's a complete physical, 3D model of our characters. I've seen some that do, unique card backs, unique character models, etc., etc. For Battle Train, like, what are some of, like, I guess, like the rewards or incentives you're planning to kind of like entice people to donate?
So, well, okay, we've got some silly ones. We've got some obvious ones, like here's early access. Here's Discord titles. Here's access to exclusive events. Like hanging out with the devs in different situations and stuff. That kind of stuff you see in a lot of Kickstarters. I really love the idea of physical rewards. However, they can be incredibly difficult to pull off as a studio that's never done them before.
Oh, yes.
So at the very least, I want to make sure that I've got... so the main bad guy, M. Bison type champion in Battle Train is named Alvaro. He's ridiculous. And I want to make sure that one of the rewards has a signed 8x10 photo of him, which is, a picture of him that's signed. So silly things like that I really enjoy. Even if it's very minimal on the physical rewards, I do love that sort of stuff. We also have a lot of like social rewards, which is kind of awkward. I haven't seen a lot of Kickstarters do this, but I'm really excited about the idea of like, hey, as a community, here's a bunch of things you can all do together that will unlock social rewards that will then force us devs to do something silly, like go wear a conductor outfit in public or something like that. That are not related to the Kickstarter itself, but just fun events to kind of engage with the community. Because as I said, that's really important for me, to find ways to engage with the community. But as for the rewards for backing, which is different than those social rewards, there's a few physical items and a few digital things. We're trying to steer away from making the build different than what everybody would get, because I want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure. And this is a place where I'd actually like you for your opinion. This being our first Kickstarter, what do you think works well and what do you think doesn't work so well? Because we're looking for all the advice we can get.
And you're telling us about like the reward structure or what rewards or incentives?
For the rewards and for the kinds of incentives that people are really excited about. Because we know it depends on the kind of gamer. Like tabletop gamers love their physical stuff. So for a game like Battle Train, reward-wise, what do you think is smart? We've got things listed out, but I'm curious to know what you think.
Yeah. Well, I think like the one thing that's always like very tricky to walk around are kind of like in-game exclusives, like a unique skin, unique art, or stuff like that. Because you always have people who will come after the fact and feel like they've been betrayed by the fact that they can't own 100% of the game. And I know with Darkest Dungeon, they eventually had, like, after like years of people saying it, they finally put like the different skins that they had as like character or backer exclusives as a DLC purchase. Let's see, like in-game credits or like an in-game nod are always like popular. That's something I see from a lot of games where, you know, they'll have, you know, the graveyard, the Hall of Heroes, and, you know, all the special backers of that game.
So we do love the idea of crediting the backers, which is on there. I also have had similar advice from fellow indies about the idea of exclusive Kickstarter content. If it's something that people can buy, that's one thing, but if you set it up to be a completely different project, or like basically a branch, then you can end up with all sorts of problems down the road too. Not just from like people missing out, but now you start ending up having to support permutations of the game, which suddenly make it very hard to bring the game somewhere else. Like, for example, if one platform requires parity, well, now you have to create new skins for them that match what you could have on PC, but have to be different. So now you've ticked off the people on PC because they don't have those skins. Like, you end up with these weird situations where everybody is competing and nobody has the same build. And I've heard nightmare stories about that. So, the idea of the graveyard is fun. I love that. Or the idea of backing, you know, giving backer nods in some way. So what else you got?
And probably the biggest don't is anything that's gameplay exclusive. Like, you do not want to do gameplay exclusive Kickstarter content, because that's when people will start, you know, they'll start taking the pitchforks at you. And again, on top of, if you have to do that on multiple versions of your game, you know, this version only has access to this content, this one only has that.
So, okay, we're good on that one too. I like the ideas of collaboration. So, you know, the idea that there being some limited rewards where the player could help us steer to like a contestant face or name and occupation, that you could play as that character as that backer potentially in the game is kind of fun. But everybody gets that. If that backer has backed that. I love the idea of collaborating with people and getting them to feel personally invested in the game. It's fun for us as well as for the backers. So that's not gameplay related as much as, you know, you've backed the ability to have a cool cosmetic perk that you could find in the game. Doesn't sound like it sounds like we're in the clear as far as that goes, at least.
And like, if you have like any kind of like personalization in the game itself already, having like, you know, special variants of that are backer exclusive, that is usually kept like more acceptable. Like, if you already have, you know, 87 hats in your game, and if you want to give like a special variant of a Kickstarter hat, people are more accepting of that. The problem is if there is no personalization, you say only the backers get, you know, a cape, or they get, you know, the special belt buckle, and no one else has access to that particular system. That is oftentimes when people start to feel very annoyed about it.
Okay, it sounds like your general philosophy is pretty similar to mine then. It's like, if you're going to have a Kickstarter thing, it's more like it's dedicated to the person and not exclusive for the person. But everybody will be able to have access to it. And that sounds kind of similar to your graveyard idea, or some of the things I mentioned earlier. So that sounds like we're thinking about things the right way then. I'm not hearing anything in what you're saying advice-wise. I'm not hearing anything that is a red flag from what we had planned, which is good. That makes me feel a little relieved.
And again, like the physical side, people love physical knickknacks and stuff like that, but that is a nightmare. Again, I've interviewed many developers who have either, you know, backgrounds when it comes to physical goods, or they don't have backgrounds. And typically you want to have experience with like physical goods, physical production, the whole logistics of that before you attempt that. Because if you don't, and you go into it, it can just wreck you in terms of planning and of course the financial side of if you've never thought about, international shipping before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It adds up. And I've done some math on some of these things, and I love the idea of physical goods. I would love to do them, but you're right. It suddenly becomes not cost effective and a huge time sink that keeps you away from making the game better, which is what people were excited about, at least ostensibly.
Yep.
I really like the idea. And this is not something that scales very well, but I love the idea of doing limited amounts of rewards for completely custom stuff. Like, hey, this is a drawing that I'm doing for you, and there's maybe 10 backers who can get it. But it's 10 drawings, and yes, there's a time sink there, but it mails flat. You put it in an envelope and mail it off, and that, to me, that seems like a fun thing that nobody else is going to have, that those 10 people would have. Yep. So, what are your thoughts on things like that?
Yeah, I think that can work if you keep the development and kind of the manufacturing costs down. Like, if you're going for, I want to give you like a full 3D model train of your own liking, that can be a little bit more of a nightmare, especially...
No, that's for the sequel Kickstarter.
Yeah. But yeah, if you keep things small like that, that's not going to kill you in terms of shipping. Because obviously shipping a piece of paper is a lot easier than shipping a full box with, custom parts, model kits, whatever.
Cool. Yeah, and it's. I would love the idea of a model kit, and I would love the idea of custom trains. I would love the idea of a tabletop version of this game someday. I would love all of those things, but I have a healthy fear of the logistics of it, and my coworkers definitely do, and they know that I get excited about things and will not be able to put their full attention on the game. So I at least know myself well enough to know that if I were to promise it, I would deliver it completely, but it would not be in the benefit of the game to do that. So we're trying to keep ourselves pretty reasonable on the rewards. I do like the idea of making things that people get excited about. So, right now I love the idea of a limited number of custom drawings that people could buy that are all hand drawn, but then it's something that is special for those people who did it, and something we know we can logistically both, one, make, and then two, get out there for people in without it pulling us away from the game for too much.
Yep.
But still feels like unique. These people own something that nobody else does, this custom drawing.
Yep. And that stuff is always like really good, especially when it comes to like driving like fan interests, that they can own a custom art piece or a custom soundtrack or something that, yes, other people can get access to something similar, but they have they have the unique thing that for the fans, like the true diehard dedicated fans of it.
Yeah, that's my goal, at least with the Kickstarter, is to make there feel like there's enough that that people who really want to show their fandom get supported and they know that we're appreciative of it. But ultimately people want to have this game be as strong as possible, so that's where the focus should be, is on the game as much as we can. So yeah.
Yep. So I know we are just about at time, so just a few final quick questions for you, Joseph, and then we'll wrap things up for today. But I would love to chat with you again in the future. I have a lot so I want to ask you about in terms of like Mother Gunship and more about bouncing that we can spend a few hours on easily.
I'd be happy to talk. Yeah, I love just chatting shop with people. It's a lot of fun. And I enjoy how pointed your questions are. They're very design centric. They're very it feels like you're a designer yourself, or at least
I have interviewed, and like my mind's like always like design focused. So like this stuff is definitely my bread and butter.
Awesome. Yeah. And there's not too much in the way of channels like that out there, influencers like that out there that are more focused on the design. So keep at it. I'm excited to talk to you again. I'd be happy to anytime.
All right. So in terms of the Kickstarter, one thing that I just want to touch on very briefly, in terms of stretch goals, additional stuff that you would like to add in the game. You mentioned, of course, multiplayer as kind of like the eye in the sky kind of goal. Anything else in terms of stretch goals that you can tease or other things you can mention for the people listening to us?
Well, there's some stuff that I don't know if it'll make it into a stretch goal or if it's something we'll be able to squeeze into the core features, but like I would love to have a train, a series of parts that could be assembled into a cat train. I think that would be ridiculously dumb. That's something that my daughter really wants, and I promised her I would have it. So it's going to be on Kickstarter to make sure that we can deliver it. But I think that'd be a lot of fun, is a cat train. Other champions, I would love to be able to stretch and add more champions to the game. This is the kind of game where, and a lot of roguelikes are like this, as you mentioned earlier, you need to have enough variety for the runs to feel unique and different. And we feel like we can achieve that, but more makes it better for almost all roguelites. Not all of them, like Splunky, no. But for Isaac, yes. For this game, definitely. So there's going to be some stretch goals that are like, okay, we'd love to have this champion, but we know we're going to need an extra 2 weeks to do it. So how do we pay for those 2 weeks or 3 weeks to do it or whatever? So there's quite a few stretch goals like that that I'm excited to talk about. Some of them are more ridiculous. Some of them are more tame. Some of them are pun related. So I think we can leave it at that right now, though, that there will be a variety of sizes and also scopes for these stretch goals.
Yeah. And again, I'm trying to resist asking more about kind of like modular design and that kind of level, because that's, again, that's several hours of a discussion we can have. So
we'll save that for the next conversation then.
So in terms of logistics, this is one question I always like to ask developers. With the Kickstarter, if everything goes accordingly, do you have an estimated timeline for when Battle Train will be released following the Kickstarter?
Well, this gets down to the number of stretch goals and the kinds of stretch goals. We have our target that we want to hit early next year. We would like to have people being able to play the full game. But like if we get the multiplayer stretch goal, well, that's going to be something that we're going to need extra time to do. So there's just no way around that. And now, the stretch goal would allow us to be funded for that time, but we won't be able to hit the same timeline because multiplayer is many months of work. To put it lightly, it's a completely different beast than single player. So that affects the final delivery date. But we feel pretty confident that like let's say we have very minimal Kickstarter results, and there's just kind of the base stuff there, that we would be in the beginning of next year, the first quarter basically of next year. And we've said that on our Steam page, and we've said that in a few other interviews in the past. And we're pretty good about hitting on time and on budget with things. We've been, while we are an indie studio, we've now been doing this for a good 5 cycles now as a team. We've really gotten to know each other very well. We're a small team, but we're seasoned, and we're pretty good at hitting our targets.
All right. Sounds good. So I think with that, we can wrap things up for the conversation, at least for right now, Joseph. And like I said, if you are free in the future, there's definitely a lot more we can touch on. So to end things for right now, in terms of social media, do you have anything you'd like to promote? So Twitter, X, Facebook, stuff like that.
Sure, you can follow us at Terrible Posture on Twitter. Also on Instagram. On TikTok, on Instagram, we're Terrible Posture 7 for some reason. But anyway, though, you can follow us there. You can just go to social.terribleposture.com. It has all the social links right there. We are having this Kickstarter coming soon, so please follow us on Kickstarter, which I can pass you the link if you're able to put it in the description. That'd be lovely. Of any places, it depends on the outlets that you're putting the podcast to, I imagine. But then the last thing is Steam. The wish listing on Steam is always a place where you can go to support developers, and it's much appreciated. Any support in terms of wish listing and following on the Steam page. So all of those things can be seen on social.terribleposture.com, though.
All right. And do you have anything? All right. And do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching to take us out for tonight?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for supporting indie games, both to you and to your fans. Indie games, it's a very busy market, but there are people who are really passionate about game design and pushing the envelope in terms of design. AAA stuff is lovely, but they have to make certain kinds of games and accommodations for their scope and for their budgets. Indie is where the real design innovations, I feel like, are happening. And if you're a big game fan and you're a fan of nuanced and fun and fringe, like territory, like new borders, new frontiers into game design, supporting indies is the way to go. And I'm grateful for your support. So thank you for everyone listening, and to you.
All right. Thank you. And thank you again, Joseph, for coming on. And like I always say to developers watching, you like to come on and talk about your games or just talk game design. I'm always looking for guests. So feel free to reach out in that respect. But we will wrap things up for today. And like I said, we are recording this in the middle of August, so I do wish you and your team the best of luck with the Kickstarter when it does go up.
Thank you.
All right. So, everyone watching, thank you for tuning in. If you are new to the YouTubing stuff, check out the Discord, the Patreon, buy all the copies of the books. Be sure to check out Battle Train. There'll be links to everything down in the description. So, for right now, Joseph, I'm going to let you go for today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and Good luck with planning for the rest of the Kickstarter.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon yourself.
Thank you. And for those of you watching, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.